The Ramchal explains that the world was created within the context of justice. God demonstrates that everything is based upon worthiness and unworthiness. And that's what God interacts with this world. And of course, ultimately, he wants us to achieve and to bring about the objective, which is positive. The man should choose to do the right thing. But if we choose to do the wrong thing, he allows the evil to have the upper hand. And the righteous are pounded into the ground. The Jewish people are low man on the totem pole. You know, it's interesting. We as Jews, our calendar is the lunar calendar, not the solar calendar. The moon, the times, you have the full moon. And you have times where the moon is a sliver, barely noticeable. And that's really Jewish history. The Jews come in and out based on our behavior. At this point, we speak about God's concealment. It's not obvious what the innate value of the Jew is. We don't see the Jew always to be that special people. The only time the world sees we're special is when the Jew toes the line fully. If the Jew toes the lines fully, like in time of Shlomo Melech, King Solomon, he ruled the world supreme. The whole world recognized the Jewish people as the chosen people. Other times, we started to wane. The so-called sunset. The moon was occluded. Down to a point, it's barely noticeable. Almost goes out of existence. And suddenly it reappears. But that's only now when there's good and evil. At the end of time, where there is no evil any longer, it'll be obvious. Only one thing will be obvious. God will no longer be in concealment. And the people will be there, people who will be worthy of being there, being in this perfected state. Not they're perfected, but they're part of a perfected state. You know, once a month when we do Kiddush Levana, we say the benediction on the new moon. It says at the end of time, Or ha-levono yikor achamo. The light of the moon will be similar to the light of the sun. Initially, when God created the world, there were two great luminaries. And then the Torah says the greater of the two is to dominate the daytime, and the smaller of the two is to dominate the nighttime, together with the stars. So the Talmud asks, first they refer to as the two great luminaries, then it refers to them as the greater and the lesser. So the Gemara answers that initially they were of equal dimension. But one of them had said to God, how do you have two kings wearing one crown? God said, if that's the case, you'll minimize yourself. So therefore the moon only is a reflection of what? Of the light of the sun. It doesn't have its own light. But at the end of time, the moon will generate its own light. It will no longer be a reflection of the light of the sun. What does that mean? The Jewish people today are the Levana. We're compared to the moon. We come in and out. Sometimes we're noticeable and we shine. And other times we're barely a sliver, hardly noticed. And that's Jewish history. At the end of time, where there'll no longer be evil, it'll be obvious to all. When God be recognized as to be the only power, then people recognize who the Jewish people are. Then the Or HaLevana, the light of the moon will be no less than the light of the sun. It will generate its own light. because there will no longer be concealment. The Jews will be recognized for what they are. Until then, we're minimized, we're compromised. They try to put us out of existence. But that's part of justice. Why are the Jews minimized? That's justice. But in a certain way, all that's justice. We get what we deserve, so to say. But the evil, they're also human beings. And he uses a term, God gives them enough rope to literally hang themselves. Evil, when it rears its head, it goes all the way. It goes the full 9 yards. Up to a point where if the objective of evil is ultimately should be good, if evil could destroy good, then evil's value is not good. But if ultimately there'll be a day of reckoning, and God will destroy the evil because of it was the counterforce. It tried to negate and eliminate good. That's good. God being able to dominate and show the world who he is, that he is the ultimate, the ruler, and he's the only one who makes that decision. And he's able to override all systems. Because if there's such evil in the world, why does the world continue? Where's justice? You know what the answer is? Justice is part of the system. God is not bound to any system. For the sake of God going into concealment, God overrides the system and he'll fund the operation, although there's no worthiness whatsoever. Because ultimately, it's going to come back. When is it going to come back? When the world is ready for its real time, which is time of Mashiach, that's when it's going to come back. So God is waiting for the objective. He says, you find two terms regard to Hashem in scripture. Sometimes God is referred to, he's sleeping. God's not sleeping. We say, Lo yonum v'lishan shomer Yisrael. The keeper of Israel, David Melch says, Lo yonum. He doesn't doze, he doesn't sleep. It only appears that way. It appears that he's out of the picture. No, he's behind the picture. He's pulling every string. But why is he pulling the strings? There's no worthiness. And according to the laws of justice, the world shouldn't continue. But since the ultimate objective is that good should be the dominant element in existence, therefore he overrides the system for the sake of that purpose. So that shows that's the true mishpat. That's true power, kingship. You know, it's interesting. We find that when we speak about the personification of evil in history of this world was Sodom and Amorah, the communities of Sodom and Amorah. And God sent an angel to destroy it. What was the level of destruction? The location of Sodom and Amorah is where we speak about the lower part. It's the lowest location in existence. The lowest point below sea level in the world is Sodom. What was Sodom before it was destroyed? It was lush, fertile. It reflected the beauty of the Garden of Eden. The people were evil. Evil not to be imagined. Perverted, corrupted, evil, defiant, to the nth degree. As the Torah depicts them, Roim v'chatoim l'Hashem ma'od. They were evil and they sinned defiantly against God. Ma'od, to a great degree, on an exaggerated level. What was the justice? They just died. They were punished. It was a cosmic destruction. It was a destruction that God said, I will not tolerate this. There's a famous question which is asked by Rav Chana Wasserman, Zechat Tzaddik Livrocha, Yecheskel the prophet, Ezekiel the prophet says the reason why Sodom was destroyed because lo poshtu yad la'oni, they did not extend their hand to the poor. They didn't give charity. Giving charity in Sodom was considered a capital crime. When the Torah tells us God heard the outcry of Sodom, what did they do? Lot had a daughter, and his daughter went and gave some bread to a poor man. It was a capital crime. So what did they do with her? They tied her up and they unleashed endless beehives, and she was stung to death. That's how they put her to death. Why? Because she did an act of charity. Charity is unaccepted. We're opposed to charity in Sodom. So because they reached such a level of cruelty, that's the reason why God vaporized them, cosmic destruction. So Rabbi Chana Wasserman asks, charity is not one of the 7 Noahide laws. So if it's not 7 Noahide laws, why were they held culpable? They legislated the law, no charity. Sodom, there's no charity. Talmud tells us in Sanhedrin that at Sodom, a poor man would come to Sodom, and every person would take a large gold coin and give it to the poor man. Seemingly very charitable. And each person who gave the gold coin to the poor man, he had his name engraved on that gold coin. So if a poor man sees that he's succeeding to such a degree, rather than taking a break when he still has some nourishment in his body, he just keeps going until sundown. And he has the sack filled of gold, these coins, and every coin has the name of the donor engraved on the coin. At the end of the day, the poor man is parched. He's malnourished. He needs food. And he has all this gold. He goes, knocks on the door, he says, can I purchase some food? Sorry. In Sodom, we give charity, we don't give food. You have to leave Sodom to buy the food elsewhere. What about water? We give no water. The man has this heavy sack of gold. He pulls it. He doesn't make it out of the outskirts of Sodom. He just passes out. He dies. What happens? Everybody goes, reclaims his gold coin. Any poor man comes to Sodom, the scenario repeats itself. That's the way they give charity. We give charity. We give yen, except the banks are not open to convert the yen into American currency. You can have all the yen in the world. You got to speak to Hunter Biden. He'll teach you how to convert yen into greenbacks. Okay, I said that purposely for one of our participants, because he said that time when they said something, he thought something, and I thought it was a racial remark. It wasn't acceptable to me. I was a little taken aback and surprised on that. Okay. But when God brought the cosmic destruction on Sodom, what did that show? That was mishpat. So although they were getting away with it for endless time, but when it was ready to pull the plug, only one being could pull that plug. Who could determine that not they're going to be destroyed? They went into a state of non-existence as if they never existed. It's desolate. There's no life there. The Dead Sea there's no life in that sea. Nothing could live there. That's how God responded, and that was God's justice. So at the end of the day, what was said? There's a verse, Ibu Drusham Rino. The destruction of the evil is song. That's when you sing, that's when you rejoice. So although God allows evil to rear its head and to dominate and dictate, if the world falls to a level of not to be believed, everything is just coming apart at the seams. God's not going to let the world to implode or explode, neither. But ultimately, he will come and he will do what he has to do to expunge the world of that evil. And that's the Kiddush Hashem. But that can only happen if the Jews misbehave. If the Jews do the right thing, evil cannot rear its head. Cannot. There's an interesting Sefarno, which I quote very often, who's one of the commentators on the Torah. He writes, there's a negative commandment that when the Jews went into Canaan, we had to annihilate the 7 nations of Canaan. It says, Lo sechai kol neshama. No living survivor from the families of Canaan are permitted to be left alive. Similar to Amalek. You have to destroy Amalek, we have to destroy the nations of Canaan. Now, he writes, initially we were meant to go into Israel immediately. When we left Sinai, 3 days later, we were supposed to go into Israel. What happened? All of a sudden, we got this bug in our head. And we said, you know something? Not so quick. Before we go, we want to send scouts. We want to scan out the land. We want to send spies. And they scattered out the land for 40 days. They came back with ominous reports, which was a lack of faith, and the Jews going into this. And they cried and they bemoaned their fate, and they're not going. God says, you know something? You people, after all you saw and all you experienced, to lack faith and trust in me, you people are not going into Israel, into Canaan, not going to the promised land. The next generation is going. What happens? The decree is this generation has to wander in the desert for 40 years. And once they all pass on, the new generation, which is less than 20, will go and be the new generation entered into the land. So Sforno writes that if this wouldn't have happened, the Canaanites were not at a level that they deserve to be annihilated. It's only because we were delayed for an additional 40 years. Those 40 years, the Canaanite nations sinned to a degree, and they fell to a level of no return, and that's what had to be annihilated. Hear this? Initially, there wouldn't have been a law, you must annihilate them, because they didn't have that representation of evil. But because they had another 40 years to sin in Israel, which is the Holy Land, therefore, they fell to a level they had no longer had worthiness even to exist. They were beyond a point of return. Therefore, God says, now, every member of the Canaanite families have to be annihilated for that reason. Again, but ultimately, what is that? That's God's justice. It's God's world to give and to take. We had said, why does the Torah begin with creation? The Torah should begin, if the Torah is a law book, it's the narrative of a Jew how to live his life. What do we have to have all the history of creation? So Rashi cites the Midrash. The Midrash says, the Jews can be accused of being interlopers. We stole the land from other nations. It starts off, God created the world. God is the creator. God gives and God takes. God bestowed Canaan for the Jewish people. As the Canaanite nations in Israel were there, he says, you people are not worthy to be any longer. You'll be taken out. I am gifting it eternally to the Jewish people. We're not thieves. Whatever we did was according to God's narrative. Perfect. In addition, not only do we take over the land, we have to destroy those nations because they are a representation of bona fide evil, similar to Amalek. But it's only because they fell to a point of no return. That's why they have to be annihilated. We find when we're in Egypt, God took us out exactly at that moment. Why? Because if we would have stayed a moment longer in Egypt, we would have reached a level of no return. If we would have fallen below the 49th level of impurity, we couldn't come back any longer. What does that mean? Exactly what we're talking about now. Because the only value of evil is ultimately this should be good. But if the good is going to be totally vaporized and subsumed by the evil, what's the point? Therefore, God, before it reached that point, that spark of holiness would be totally extinguished, God took us out of Egypt. And it was reignited every day going towards Sinai until it was a full-fledged, fully developed entity of holiness when we stood at Sinai on day 50. Somebody many years ago asked me a question. I mentioned recently on the class, on the Zoom, and there was an observant man. He says, you have today they say there's over 8 billion people in existence. God maintains this world, wills their existence, all their amenities, all what's going on, all the economies, the world, the forests, the oceans, the rivers, the species, everything. How many people would you consider are tzaddikim, who are devoutly righteous in this world? Relatively speaking, to 8.5 billion, you can count them on one finger. Does it make any sense? God should underwrite such an enterprise called existence, terrestrial, celestial, with all these people and their needs and everything, for what? For the handful of tzaddikim. Doesn't make any sense. That's the question this person asked me. So what I said to him then was, I said, you yourself, this question he asked me 35 years ago, maybe more. I said, look, you own companies. You have 25,000 employees. It's you and your wife, and you have 3 children. You work 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. Does it make any sense that you have all these thousands of people working day and night and running these companies with all the systems to support 3 people? Does that make sense? Doesn't make any sense. So what's the answer? For me, my wife and children, it makes a lot of sense. If I had to have 100,000 people working 3 shifts, if it's for me, it's worth it. What is the value of a tzaddik to God? We can't even fathom what innate value of a tzaddik is. He's a representation of holiness and purity, and he's able to cleave to God, which is the ultimate objective of creation. To be at a level, to be able to be part of eternity. There may be a handful of people, but it's like the 1,000 flawless carat diamond. How many are there? They never existed. These people never existed. All this is finite. All the finite is worthwhile for that infinite, but it's only one or a handful, relatively speaking. It doesn't make a difference. And that's called kingship. That's God dictating, showing he's the creator. It may not make sense for you, or it makes sense for him. He set the systems to maximize on the end result, but if it's not, he overrides the systems for the sake of the tzaddik. At the time of the Babylonian exile, there was a question, they would have killed the last remnant of the Davidic line. They were going to end it. What would be if that happens? Messiah is Mashiach ben David. The Messiah is a descendant from the Davidic line. Can't happen. And it didn't happen. Miraculously, somebody who was from that line was able to father a child, and the line continued. Otherwise, it wouldn't have happened. Many things happen, which it's contrary to every statistic. Despite the statistics mean nothing. Because statistics are based on norms. And there are exceptions. But who sets norms, and what are norms based upon? It's based on how the world functions, how the economies rise and fall. But they only rise and fall because that's part of the system. That is the system. The Jewish people work outside the system. God wills our existence. We're not bound to the system. Therefore, even though statistically speaking, and historically speaking, the Jews should not exist, but we still exist. Because he is the system. And he can manipulate the system as he chooses to manipulate the system for the ultimate purpose, which is good, which is to achieve a level of perfection in existence, which only can come through the Jewish people. The Gemara explains something in one location with the allegory. A king goes and he offers a very large amount of money as loan to one of his subjects. And he says to the subject, the due date is in 1,000 years to pay back. Your great-great-great-grandchild, 10 generations down, could pay off the debt. It's okay. He has somebody who's his closest subject, most intimate subject. He says to him, when I lend you the money, you must start paying off the debt immediately. Every month, I want partial payment. And when the year 1,000 comes, the debt is going to be paid off. So he says to the king, he says, we have such a special relationship to this person who's basically a stranger. You give him the same amount of money or more and say, you paid off as long as it's paid off by the due date. And me, who is so close to you, every month I have to be preoccupied to make sure to make that small payment. And every month I have to be busy with this. Why? He says, you don't understand. That I'm asking you to pay it off every month. And the word is to pick at the debt. You're picking at it, chipping away the debt. I'm doing you a favor. Because based on the tendency of human being of procrastination, the other person is going to leave it and delay. And finally, the due date is there. And humanly, it's going to be impossible to pay that debt. And if he can't pay the debt, I will destroy him. I don't want to destroy you. So even though for the moment it may be difficult to deal with the distraction, with the pressure, but ultimately it's going to be within your means to pay it off small increments at a time, that ultimately when the debt's going to come to be paid off fully, you'll have a small amount to pay off. And it'll be within your means to be able to pay it off. So therefore, it's out of love that I set the rules of this loan that has to be paid off every month, which is not for the world. That's the difference between the Jewish people and the nation of the world. No nation has suffered the way we've suffered. None. You know, I once gave a lecture. We're the chosen people. God chose us. Chosen for what? No nation has ever suffered the way we've suffered. Oh, we chosen to suffer. The suffering is God is chipping away the debt. That at the end of time, we pay off. God is expunging little bits of evil. He's purging us gradually over the centuries, over the millennia. So at the end of time, when it's time for real time, and the Jewish people will be chosen to be the beacon of truth and purity and holiness, there's not going to be any evil associated with us. Because we were expunged through our experience through the millennia of all the shortcomings, all the transgressions which were involved in. The nation of the world, they're going to be so besmirched and so permeated with this spiritual, toxic, infectious waste. They can't even go near it. God will not tolerate their existence. And ultimately, they're going into the oblivion of these people for that reason. So all the suffering we have is a positive. It's an indication there's a problem. Person has a fever, it's an indication of a problem. Person has a pain, it's an indication of a problem. These are all symptoms. And if we take it and we put it in the right and we frame it correctly, and we experience it properly, and we get the alert, and we do the tshuva, and we try to do better because of this, then the punishment is actually meeting its purpose, that it has a positive effect, not a negative effect. For that reason. Therefore, the Navi says, Chavakuk, it's like a hen pecking in a barnyard. It uses the word pecking, pico. Pico is a Hebrew word, but that's where pecking comes. As the rooster pecks, that's the way God pecks at us. He's pecking at us continuously. Every day, every month, every moment of our life, he's pecking at us. Anti-Semitism, no equality, always something happening. Sometimes he pecks stronger, sometimes he pecks less. But there's always something, there's always an issue.